10 years, in very simple terms, what I would like to see Nigeria achieve is take up leadership in the space sector, especially in the African continent. We have all you can see all the elements are there, but it's the intentionality to pull that together in a cohesive manner and walk towards that goal. Because you could have fragmented elements, but it has to be intentionality.
From the Defense and Aerospace Report, this is The Downlink, a podcast about the intersection of space, the space business, and defense. Not just what's over the horizon, but what's happening above it. I'm your host, Laura Winter. Nigeria. It's the most populous country in Africa, roughly 227 million people. It has Africa's fourth largest economy. Its gross domestic product in 2024 reached $243 billion. The nation's armed forces represent the continent's third largest standing military. So it shouldn't be a huge surprise that Nigeria has space-based economic and security ambitions. This episode is from a discussion I had with Jane Egerton for the Stacks Talk event that opened this week's Value of Space Summit. Jane is NIGCOMSAT CEO and Managing Director. NIGCOMSAT is a state-owned enterprise. It owns and operates a single geostationary communications satellite, and Nigeria's government announced a few days ago that it was planning to develop 2 more NIGCOM satellites. But before I play our interview, here's a little more background. Nigeria currently has 4 operational satellites on orbit, built and launched with Chinese, British, and Japanese support. And here's where things get interesting. China built and then launched Nigeria's Defense Space Administration's DELSAT-1 satellite almost 3 years ago, in November 2022. And yet, Nigeria is not a member of China's International Lunar Research Center Consortium. In fact, about a month after the DELSAT-1 launch, Nigeria became the first African nation to sign the U.S.-led Artemis Accords in December 2022. It's believed that by signing the Artemis Accords, Nigeria is signaling that it is open to Western investment in its commercial space activities. According to the analytics company Space in Africa, between 1998 and 2023, satellite contracts from Africa, all of Africa, were valued at $4.7 billion. Of those contracts, just under a third, almost $1.4 billion, went to China and Russia. U.S. companies accounted for only $250 million. Now here's our conversation. Welcome back to Stacks Talk. Now we have a really special one-on-one interview with someone that I rate as a real business and space leader. And here in the United States, I bet that you haven't actually heard of her, but you should pay attention. Jane Egerton is a powerhouse. Jane is an engineer and a West African business leader. Jane leads Nigerian Communications Satellite Ltd, or NIGCOMSAT, as the Managing Director and CEO. Jane is a tech executive, author, and angel investor. Jane has worked with Meta, Avanti, Ericsson, Nokia. Gosh, am I leaving anybody out here? On behalf of the entire Stacks Talk team, thank you so much. We are so honored to have you. And thank you for making the time to join us today.
Thank you so much, Laura. I am excited to be here. I can't wait to kick into this conversation, but I'm truly excited to be here to have this session with you.
So let's start with an introduction to NIGCOMSAT. What kind of organization is it? And I say this because the government's involved, but it also does business. It has revenues for communication services. It delivers to a variety of customers. I know it delivers services to local governments, the military, and to companies, I believe. And what assets does it have on orbit? How many people does it employ? And what sectors does it serve? So yeah, an overview. What is this organization that you lead?
Thank you, Laura. I'm always excited to talk about NIGCOMSAT. So NIGCOMSAT actually stands for Nigerian Communications Satellite Ltd. Started about 2006. So is an actual limited company owned by the Nigerian government that manages, operates, commercializes the communication satellite that is owned by the government. And it's interesting to note that it is a limited company because people tend to think, oh, it's owned by the government. It is a limited company. It's when it was started, it was actually off the vision of the government in 2001 when we came up with the national space policy. And that space policy wanted to achieve two things. We were looking to foster indigenous competence in space technology, and we were trying to push for socioeconomic development. It ended up being creating a roadmap, implementing two agencies, a research agency called NASTA and the commercial entity called NIGCOMSAT. Now, while the research entity holds some of the Earth observation assets we have, maybe I'll come to that, NIGCOMSAT owns, manages, runs, commercializes the actual communication satellite we have, which is called NIGCOMSAT 1R. Now, we originally launched NIGCOMSAT 1 in 2000, we launched it in 2007, I believe. It had a bit of a mishap. It wasn't a very fruitful venture. So we had to relaunch it. And that's why we called it 1R. It was a replacement. So we relaunched 1R in 2011. And we've managed that communication satellite since 2011. I think the great thing about it is that even though it's a limited company mandated to really commercialize this asset, it also has a core pillar, which is to help in providing broadband penetration and supporting, sustainability within the government. So it's driven by three things. National sovereignty, so especially for some of the agencies we support, security, also relates to some of the agencies you see us working with. Then sustainability, that's some of the ecosystems or sectors we tend to work in. So you see us work with agriculture, healthcare. Those are sectors we're intentionally working with government agencies to provide broadband so that they are present in even rural areas. You see us work a lot with the defense sector, the military, the Air Force, the Army in Nigeria, and really driving, not just supporting them in terms of security-wise, but also in terms of national sovereignty, making sure that we are pulling our weight when it comes to supporting these government agencies. And we commenced that journey. We're still on the journey. It's been interesting because I took up the helm of affairs about actually 2 years ago.
Yeah, it is just 2 years for my research.
Just hit me now, like that was 2 years ago. I took up that role 2 years ago, and it's been a joy to see how we're gonna work at moving this whole vision to the next phase.
Well, let's talk about that a bit more, right? Because you just said that NIGCOMSAT really came out of a policy, a government shift and change in approach in 2001, right?
Yes.
And so that really shows that Nigeria has had space goals for decades, right? So, in fact, there's some really good policies that seem to indicate that Nigeria's political leadership understands just how important space systems will be for Nigeria's future, for its economic prosperity and its national security. But these initiatives have kind of been slow rolled, and it's not like Nigeria hasn't had demands, though, right, on its national budget. It has security challenges, it has educational challenges, it has economic challenges, broadband connectivity challenges, just like you said. But, space could play a huge role in addressing each of those challenges. So what's the state of Nigeria's space ecosystem today? Could you just give us like a snapshot of where we are today in terms of that ecosystem? Because I know there's a lot more inside than people realize.
Well, no, there is actually. So when I talked about we came up with that policy in 2001, and in 2005 we came up with a roadmap. We called it the Horizon, the 2005 to 2030 roadmap, where we wanted to highlight things we were going to target. Like, we wanted to train Nigerian astronauts. We wanted to be able to build our own satellites indigenously. We wanted to launch Nigerian-made satellites. We had this big ambition of what we wanted to do with associated goals, rocket systems, large-scale commercialization of the space technology. We wanted to have spin-off industry, in all kinds of applications, software. And the truth is an audible goal. ambitious, but like the important thing with goals, you have to keep your eye on the ball. Good intention, started well, but we haven't truly achieved all that we wanted. But we've got some great milestones. So, like I said, we ended up launching, in terms of the geostationary satellites, we launched in terms of the Earth observation satellites, we launched three. There's Nigerian Sat 1, we launched Nigerian Sat 2. We actually also launched the Nigerian Sat X. Then we also launched the communications satellite, which is NIGCOMSAT 1R. But some of the other things we didn't achieve like we wanted to, like, astronaut training or space flight, or we wanted to have a spaceport or rocket launch. But I think more importantly for me is the biggest socio-economic development we wanted to achieve, which I believe will drive the economy, spin off a whole space economy, because we have realized, of course, you have the traditional economy, and for most people know that Nigeria as a nation has been totally dependent on oil or crude oil for a long time, since we found it in the late 60s, early 1970s. And it's like the black gold it is. It could also be a black curse, because at some point, we're totally dependent on that single source, which hasn't helped us, because with the fluctuations and the challenges that come with just being focused on one single sector, we have suffered the repercussion. And there's been a need to diversify the economy. And one of the greatest ways we've seen to do that is the ICT, or the digital economy, which could also spin up to the space technology. And I know that one of the things we also did in the past, which was to privatize the telecom economy in 2001, saw a spin-off where, just by doing that and inviting private players and opening it up and looking for partnerships, that ICT or digital economy grew from just a single digit to the contribution to the GDP to currently contributes about, I think last Q4 it was about 17% to the GDP from a single digit. So like literally next to services industry like agriculture and oil. So it's important to know that in really creating socioeconomic development, you could do multiple sectors. It doesn't have to be totally dependent on one. And I think that was the original intention, if you were trying to do that, if that was the vision. But what I think is really important now, looking at the state, is making sure we can go back to implementing that by being intentional. I mean, we're doing a couple of things, but really being more intentional. And that's why I do appreciate this administration. Now, it might be sounding like, this is, you're part of the administration, but, we've had this ambition since 2005. Or since 2001, when we created the policy. We started well, but it's 20 years, 2 decades. What can we learn from that? And how can we ensure we put our eyes back on the ball? Because we've seen what the ICT and the telecom has done. And this is another opportunity to do that, because it does have the tendency to create more jobs, help the startup ecosystem, improve the GDP of the country. There's so much it has. There's a lot of potential in doing that. So I think in summary, what I'm saying is that we have started. We put some investment, we put some asset there. We haven't achieved every goal or target we put our hands to try to achieve. But this is a good time, especially if you see the way the space sector is going, to really go back to the drawing board, take from our experiences and relaunch and re-strategize. So that's how I would summarize the state. Is that we're doing something, but there's more that could be done.
Well, let's go beyond the summary though, right? Let's take a look at Nigeria's space ambitions and what they should be. And you've just sort of laid that out. And these ambitions have been laid out in policies and in initiatives, and a lot of good ideas. Nigeria is in a really amazing place in the world. Launch would be actually quite cheap if it was done from Nigeria, right? It's a great place to have a spaceport. Great. I mean, let's be real here. Nigerians know how to do infrastructure, but what does your nation need to get there, really? I mean, I know that there are plans for a spaceport. These things have been drawn. I know that a satellite manufacturing facility, at least one, that those plans
Yeah.
have also been drawn. And, Nigeria has people that can do these kinds of things. But I'd also really like to know, and I think it would benefit this audience a lot, is what is Jane Egerton's vision for Nigeria space in 2035? What do you want to see in Nigeria
I think in
in,
very
in, in 10 years,
in
right?
10 years, in very simple terms, what I would like to see Nigeria achieve is take up leadership in the space sector, especially in the African continent. We have all the, you can see all the elements that are there, but it's the intentionality to pull that together in a cohesive manner and walk towards that goal. Because you could have fragmented elements, but it has to be intentionality to take that leadership and walk towards the goal. And I think we can truly take up that leadership space, especially in the African continent. We could help drive policy, space industrialization, partnership, attract funding, attract investment, create jobs and sustainability within the continent. And it's evident that there's still a lot to be done. There's still, like, if you look at West Africa, I think, look at all the nations in West Africa, only Nigeria has its own communication satellite. A couple of them had tried, to do like a CubeSat for educational purpose. It's quite a lot of investment to take on that journey to go to space, to take on that journey to build space assets, to use space as a launch pad to enable socioeconomic development. And with all this experience we've acquired doing this in 20 years, I think it's now to be intentional, because for the next phase, you just don't only want to create those opportunities and grow the economy. We want to export and support nations within Africa. I think that's, for me, that's really taking leadership. We want to be at the forefront about thinking about the future and how we want Africa to play a role in the global space sector. And that will really take us being intentional. It wouldn't happen by chance. It wouldn't happen by just writing down the goals. You know that already. It wouldn't even happen alone by just the government, because I think the first phase, if I look at it, I think one of the things I think probably could have been improved is it was a heavy dependence on the government as an entity fulfilling a lot of that task. We have seen that if you open it up to the private sector can drive a lot of the sectors and help DFIs, cohesively achieve that strategy, collaborate with other partners. So it's really been intentional, really going back and drafting what's going to be the next 10 years. What do we want to achieve in 2035?
Yeah, but what do you want to achieve in 2035? You've got leadership. I got you. And that's for reals. And Nigeria really is in an incredible position to take that leadership position, just like you said, because Nigeria actually has the know-how, has assets in terms of most of West Africa, if not all of West Africa. But if you could take it a step further, I mean, here's another example where I think Nigeria also takes a leadership role. I mean, you NIGCOMSAT, very specifically have experience with bringing broadband to the back of beyond, right? That's the 774 project. And if I'm not mistaken, I think you brought, actually, I have it written down right here because I needed those notes, right? I'm serious. It's really hard, but no, I mean, you connected 45 local government secretariats in 8 states in roughly 2 months.
And that's just the start. The intention is to cover 774 in 2 years, and we will do that. And that goes to show what we can, because our ambition, that's why I'm talking about, taking leadership. And leadership starts with fixing, I'll come to that. First things first. I believe
leadership is not just talking the talk, it's walking the walk, right? And so this whole 774 project, NIGCOMSAT is actually walking the walk.
Yes. And that's what we
showing
want.
What's possible.
What is possible. And that's what we want to see happen in the sector. I think the first thing for us is to fix the foundational issues. And you see me talking about leadership, because I think if you go and look at that big ambition, how do we achieve it? Some of the things that had been our challenge was implementing the goals. The goals themselves were lauders, they're ambitious,
they're good
goals, but they have to be implemented. And some of the things could be relating to really drafting cohesive policy and making sure that we can activate some of the key requirements when it comes to governance and policy. and also evolve it because the sector is evolving. The fact that we created something in 2005, there's a lot of things that will no longer be relevant. That policy, that whole strategy can be relooked at. We want to, some of the things I'm saying, because there's already some things happening. Really look at the national space strategy for now, 2035. We should be sitting and putting that together now for the next 10 years. What do we want to do, and how do we want to lay out that roadmap? What will be the KPIs? What are the rules that will guide us to engage for the next 10 years? That is so really important, that it's really laid out clearly, and not just the in terms of the policy. I think, because I'm talking about inside out now, so we're starting those foundational things, looking at our industry moves as well. That is really important. Spacing, really creating a clear space industrialization plan of how we're going to do the next 10 years. What are we going to do in terms of all these targets about local assembly, about skill sets, about manufacturing, about supporting enabling sectors with space? How do we want to do that? How do we want to build in Nigeria? We have to be intentional. You just don't say, I want to build in Nigeria. How do you want to do that? Who do we help? And you see some of these things play out in some of the things we're doing in NIGCOMSAT. Like, we have an accelerator program we've been running for 2 years, really to encourage startups in the space ecosystem. We want to do that. We want to pull investors to be attracted to want to invest in space. We want to support startups that are launching into that arena. We want to see startups move not just from downstream but to upstream. There's a whole, that's what I'm saying, it has to be intentional. It won't happen on its own. So we've run this accelerator program for 2 years. When we started last year, we started with 25 startups. This year, 35. We want to see more. We want to do 100 startups next year. You keep scaling it. I think that's the intentionality, having that plan and being intentional. The same thing about we wanting to have an assembly integration plant here. We want to build here. It's really going to be working together as well with private sector. I don't think everything should be totally reliant on the government, which was part of the original plan. There should be part commercialization, then full commercialization. So that's where we have to encourage the private sector, partner with the private sector, partner with also DFIs. The government is also there to, kick off some of those things to start to open the industry. So important. Things like even launch a space fund to help that. Those are some of the, plans that will come along, because we're right now helping them to accelerate, but funding is a thing for that. We also know that space, especially upstream, is a heavy capital intensive projects, and they will need support there. So those types of things in terms of supporting them with the resources. So if we do that, we can then move to the next phase. And some of these things I'm saying it because they're already happening, but I'm telling you what we will need to do for the next years, which is more to revamp some of our flagship projects. I talked about all the assets we had launched in 2007, 2011, but some of these assets are end of life. It's time to replace them, which is what some of the things we are working on, from the Earth observation satellite to the geostationary satellites, some of these assets to the ground equipment. We need to go back, because those assets are also required to achieve some of the programs we want to do, the sustainability, the defense, the security solutions we want to present for us. Those assets are required, and you could do both.
Let me jump in, because I don't want to lose this opportunity to talk about the assets a bit. Yeah. And the intentionality, because Nigeria's space assets have been built and launched by China.
Yeah.
Right. And I just need to put that out there, because, we here in the United States are a little nervy about China. Right. And what you're saying actually would be a move to have sovereign capabilities. Right? Sovereign manufacturing, sovereign launch, sovereign STEM workforce, right? That this is really Nigerian, has Nigerian DNA in it.
Built in Nigeria, built in Nigeria.
Right. How important is it to Nigeria to actually have those things really built on Nigerian soil, launched from Nigerian soil? I mean, I can assume, and that's, which is a bad thing to do, but it would grant Nigeria that leadership position, but also that independence from other sort of tides that are ebbing and flowing in the international community? No? So how important is sovereignty or achieving that in your goal set for 2035, let's say?
So if you look at the global trends, we say that data is a new oil, but data sovereignty is a thing today. It's actually the rules of engagement and the warfare of today is different from the warfare of the past.
Yeah.
And that where things like data sovereignty start to play a key role. And I think as an African sovereign nation that's taking up leadership, that's one of the great ways to show that is to build that sovereign capability in sectors like this, to implement it, to support it. And that was the original plan. If you look at the roadmap, and I talked about, what the policy was saying, that's what we really wanted to achieve. Now, have we achieved it? We haven't achieved, but it's so important for what we are trying to. It's so important that we build in Nigeria, build for Nigeria. And if we haven't achieved it, then we have to make sure we look at the elements that will allow us achieve that. Not just investing in being intentional about the talent and being intentional about encouraging the sectors, the market to embrace it. Being intentional about making space a known discussion topic in the nation and people to appreciate our role in space and what we are doing. Because I know you were talking about a lot of the media activities. It's an intention.
Oh, yeah, you have been on a roll over there at NIGCOMSAT. This like past 7 days, I mean, you have been taking cat o' nine tails to journalists, telling them that they have to cover space, that they have to educate the Nigerian population about the importance of space to the nation, to kitchen table issues, to the unbanked, right? I thought that was really amazing. And then another thing that I also found really interesting in the recent news coverage that NIGCOMSAT has had is that you have claimed that if there were more resellers, that you could actually improve NIGCOMSAT's revenues while also improving connectivity, but that those resellers need to be in out there and outside of Abuja per se, right? That there needs to be more of a commercial ecosystem to take what NIGCOMSAT can do forward. And what I also found really interesting was that you said that the full capacity of NIGCOMSAT 1R is not being fully used.
No, it's not fully being used.
So what is with that? Because it's an incredibly powerful satellite. It provides incredible connectivity. You're able to get to places and bring broadband faster than if you were to lay cable. I mean, it's kind of like a jumping of technological generation in terms of connectivity. So yeah, what's holding NIGCOMSAT back from being able to, let's say use 75% of its capability?
So I think it's back to some of the things we're discussing. It's really focusing on the goal. Why is NIGCOMSAT there? And if you focus on the goal, in achieving the goal, you utilize the capacity. That's the truth. There is so much demand, but we need to focus on the goal. We want to, today, the nation.
Well, see, that's really interesting. I'm so sorry, I'm going to butt in again, but you said something really important. There is so much demand.
There is so much demand.
And there is also the capability, right?
I think it's creating.
How do you build the bridge, right? Because it's that middle spot, right?
There is so much demand and there is so much capacity, but we need to create the right business models and structure that can move the capacity to the demand. Because I don't think we are having a demand problem. No. The demand exists. You could see even private operators coming to the market and really doing great. And there is supply, but is that intentionality to bridge both? And it's the structures, the business models really have to work. And I think that's one of the things I was trying to say to the session I had, inviting potential partners, is that we've discovered we can't do it alone. Then we become a bottleneck. We can't. You do have the capacity, but you don't have the structures and the models to actually activate the entire market. So you do it in partnership. And it's been shown to work. We see that happen in the telcos when we did that at fintech. So it's, even in the oil and gas, we did something similar, and it does work. So these, because you have a large population, even the West African market, even the African market, like a huge potential, but you can't be everywhere.
Well, satellite technology in terms of like, sending signals down, it can be pretty much everywhere. Well, kind of once every 19 minutes
In
or
terms
so,
of the
right?
structure,
Yeah.
not in terms of technology can be everywhere, but in terms of
Right.
structure to activate the market is required that you understand that you have to work with partners in the market. And that's one of the things we realized that, if we really want to focus on the goal, we have so much capacity, it has to be utilized, and we might not be able to take all to the market. We need to build the right models and find the partners that would help take that to the market. And that was like trying to solve that. That's what we're just trying to solve that, bridge that gap between demand and supply to say, oh, there's a huge chasm here and we need to solve it.
Mm.
And I think that's what I talk about being intentional. You really need to go back to what's your vision, what's the mandate, how far are we achieving the goals, why are we not achieving it, and just keep asking the question why. And then once we keep asking the question why, like what could be done starts to come up. And in answering the what, we start to, find out what is required. And I think that's one of the reasons we did that, because there is so much. Nigeria, just say with Africa, the penetration levels are still low. In most cases, less than 50%. That means there's a huge demand. We don't have a problem. Now, you could say Africa and nation, maybe there's a supply problem, but Nigeria shouldn't have a supply problem because we have assets.
You have assets. I mean,
Yes,
you have real, like, no kidding
yes.
assets.
So I think it's not being intentional. That asset should be utilized to bridge that gap.
So let's talk about, again, that middle. And I'd like to understand a little bit more about the space entrepreneurial ecosystem that you have, as through NIGCOMSAT, been supporting. You're also an angel investor, so you know what it takes to get young companies through to the next stage where they really can be independent and they're not just, looking for money to keep the lights on, sort of thing, right? So what is Nigeria's space startup ecosystem? I mean, I know that there's at least a dozen Nigerian space companies.
Probably more than 1,000 because so when we did start,
Yeah, that's what I mean. I don't know what I'm talking about. Educate me. I just know it's there.
We do know we have an awareness problem. Definitely, I can always tell you that we do have an awareness problem. So one of the things we realized as well is that, talking about you can't do it alone, is that you need to get the private sector activated, invested, and interested in space. And one of the easiest ways to go for this is, look at the ecosystem and look at the startups, because that's where the ideas start from. That's where the innovation starts from. And, instead of trying to innovate alone, you should have partners and innovate with partners. And that's why we did start the accelerator program. And when we started, I know when we first put in the application, we had over 400 applicants. And we shortlisted them to 25 because we were looking for some key criteria. We wanted to be sure that the leadership was ready and invested to work as hard as required. And we wanted to be sure they already had a product in market, stuff like that. Even though they might not have some kind of funding, they've not been, maybe none of the, private or PE funds have come in, or, VC funds. But we wanted to be sure that, you already had a product market fit. So, we decided to narrow it down. So it just showed us that there was potential. It's just that nobody had been intentional really looking at that sector and saying, how can we support this ecosystem beyond just putting policy in and regulation? How can we invest into it? And there's so many ways to invest. And when we started that journey, it became clear that we're going to do this again and again. So we were trying to support them, especially in trying to make sure that these businesses can thrive and they're sustainable. They have a product that is bridging a solving for an actual problem, and that the addressable market is big enough for them so that it can be monetized and it is profitable. Because nobody's going to invest in something that is not profitable, or they cannot see the long-term goal that this thing is sustainable over time. So
They're
we
the
were,
but you know how hard it is, though. I mean, if you invest in a space company, at least here in the United States, the way it's really viewed is that you really cannot expect to have an off-ramp for 10 years because space A is hard, it's capital intensive, and it takes time.
you
It
need
just
patient
just
capital.
is, right? So, speaking of investment, how who can invest? Who should invest? Who should be investing in Nigeria, A, and B, can foreign entities, whether they be individuals or private equity funds, I mean, can let's say an American private equity investor, invest in Nigerian space? Is that possible? How could that all work?
So so in terms of who can invest, that's based on the landscape. Nigeria is a capitalistic country. There's no
Oh,
limit.
yeah, it's got a reputation for like being, some of the best entrepreneurs ever for
Yes,
like
we
the
do
past
have
like
one
thousand
of the best
years, right? I mean, this
entrepreneurs.
is like part of Nigerian DNA.
Yes. So in terms of who can invest, I would say anybody can invest. We don't have any the market is not closed in that sense. It's actually very open. I think where the issue is that there's no awareness that does exist. There's been investors have been keen on sectors which we've seen grow, and it could be possible because those are sectors that are really solving for problems that are really visibly out there, and those are sectors we've put shine a lot of light on. And nobody has really been intentional in saying that, oh, you can use space technology to solve problems. And these are people doing it. And these people doing it, we need to invest because there are opportunities in this sector and in this market to grow it, to scale it. So I think those conversations have not been had because it's when you have the conversations, people become aware, investors become aware. Investors don't wake up and decide, oh, I just got this hunch, I'm going to invest in this sector. It's the information they gather, that informed decision they analyze, and then decide it makes sense. And those are the discussions we want to have. So I'll give you an example. When we run the accelerator programs, on the last day of the program, we run it as a 6 to 9 month program. We do what we call a demo day. And it's really deliberate. For the demo day, we bring investors to the room, from VCs to PE to angel investors to other sectors, because there are all kinds of ways you can invest and partnerships, to be in this room and get the startups to pitch. Because I think that is when it starts to make sense, because sometimes people don't even know how space plays a role until they start to hear about the solutions and what's being done. A good example is a Nigerian company that makes drones in Nigeria and signed over $1 million contract just like a couple of weeks ago, and I believe it's with a US with a US market. That's where we want to see the startups go, that they could innovate and export their innovation. We're not just consumers of innovation or technology. We can also help in that whole sector and export this innovation and technology. But it's to create that awareness as well. So having those sessions have started the conversations, and we don't want the conversations to stop. That's the reason we are always making sure that the media is also part of the conversation, because they are very good at telling these stories. And when we tell the stories, to get into the right audience, so we get the right ears of the investors, the people that are looking for ways to take up that opportunity and help them scale.
Jane, we're running out of time, unfortunately. I could just keep talking with you forever,
I thought we
right?
just started.
So we need to have you back. We need to have you here in the United States more often. So really, on behalf of everyone that's part of the Stacks Talk team, the Space ISAC, the Value of Space Summit, I want to say thank you so much for making the time to come on and talk to us about all things Nigeria, NIGCOMSAT, ecosystem, entrepreneurship. Really, just thank you so much.
Laura, it's definitely a pleasure it's been a pleasure being here, chatting with you.
That's it for this week. For your daily dose of award-winning defense coverage, listen to the Defense and Aerospace Report with Vago Muradian. And for the maritime domain, Listen to Cavas Ships with Chris Cavas and Chris Cervello, and get your air domain news and analysis from the Air Power Podcast with JJ Gertler and Vago Muradian. I'm Laura Winter. Thank you for listening.